goodness. Okay. I'm going to try to I'm going to try to record now, okay? I'm going to try to record even though you're in here. I'm going to try to record a video. Yeah, okay. That's cool. Keep head keep headbutting, why don't you? Okay. Okay, everyone. Today I'm going back to basics. I'm going back to my origins. I'm going back to my roots. So everything I've done on this channel so far has been serious literature or attempts at serious literature. But I'm all actually about just random stories written by strangers on the internet. I'm going back to one of the best creepypasta ever made, which is Mr. Widemouth. All right. So many people are familiar with Mr. Widemouth because of its incredibly high quality. All right. This is one of the stories that I keep going back to and that I'm still impressed by all these years later. It was one of my favorites back in the day, and it's still one of my favorites now. And I think that's because, despite its very short length, it's deeper than many stories, both thematically and just in terms of the quality of its writing. So we're going to go into it today. We're going to read through it, and we're going to talk about my opinion on the story. During my childhood, my family was like a drop of water in a vast river, never remaining in one location for long. We settled in Rhode Island when I was 8, and there we remained until I went to college in Colorado Springs. Most of my memories are rooted in Rhode Island, but there are fragments in the attic of my brain which belong to the various homes we had lived in when I was much younger. So, how I feel about this beginning is that it's a tad bit too literary for what I would say is supposed to be a log of a real event. This is let's be honest, really hard thing to balance when you're writing creepypasta, is to decide basically how much am I going to write this like a story, because it is a story, and how much am I going to write it like a record of a real event. Most people, when they're trying to remember something from the past, they'll try to be as accurate and as straightforward as possible in describing it. But a problem with that is that it completely robs the story of tension. Like, he could just tell us exactly what Mr. Widemouth is. Now, I wouldn't go that far, but I do think an introduction like, my family was like a drop of water in a vast river, is perhaps a tad too poetic for my liking. The narrator says, we settled in Rhode Island when I was 8. But then earlier, he says, during my childhood, my family was like a drop of water in a vast river. It seems that what he's really saying is during his rather early childhood, his family was like a drop of water in a vast river. After the age of 8, you still have a lot of childhood left to go. So that word choice is a little bit inaccurate. Again, I'm not going to fault them too much because I think in the end, it still sounds very good. So this introduction is quite excellent. It gives us a reason to believe the narrator when he claims that his memory of his childhood is not great. Moving from town to town during a part of your life most people don't remember much of anyways will do that to you. So it makes sense that his memories are going to be a little bit hazy here. As the intro continued, I got a little bit of pen pal vibes as the narrator describes some isolated memories that don't mean much to him. Of course, Mr. Widemouth actually precedes pen pal by a few years, so if there's any inspiration, it's the other way here. It's going the other way. Pen pal would be inspired by Mr. Widemouth, which there's a non-zero chance that that is the case. Most of these memories are unclear and pointless. Chasing after another boy in the backyard of a house in North Carolina, trying to build a raft to float on the creek behind the apartment we rented in Pennsylvania, and so on. But there's one set of memories which remains as clear as glass, as though they were just made yesterday. I often wonder whether these memories are simply lucid dreams produced by the long sickness I experienced that spring, but in my heart, I know they are real. It's interesting here, the narrator says that these memories are particularly clear. Now, later on, in fact, right after this, we're going to be told that when Mr. Widemouth appears, the narrator doesn't remember exactly when Mr. Widemouth appeared. So, are these memories quite as clear as the narrator claims? Again, not sure, but again, it's up to the narrator here. It's not really on the author that the narrator might be making a little bit of a mistake, might be misjudging how clear his memories are. Quite interestingly, we see the narrator give a potential rational explanation for the things that he saw. Yet the sheer vividness of these memories in his mind shows that these events are important, either formative or traumatic memories that stick in the brain. They're probably not just delusions of sickness. They're not the half-remembered sketches that we see in a story, again, like Pen Pal, where everything needs to be recontextualized, where the narrator is rebuilding his memory. At this point, just a couple paragraphs in, I'm already hooked on this. I want to know what these memories are, why they are so clear, why they are so different from the rest of his life. Mind you, the enigmatic title, Mr. Widemouth, has probably already done some of that work. We're already pulled in with that alone. We want to know, what is Mr. Widemouth? Who is Mr. Widemouth? So it's doing a fantastic job so far. We were living in a house just outside the bustling metropolis of New Vineyard, Maine, population 643. It was a large structure, especially for a family of 3. There were a number of rooms that I didn't see in the 5 months we resided there. In some ways, it was a waste of space, but it was the only house on the market at the time, at least within an hour's commute to my father's place of work. All right, so there is some logic here that's just crazy. And I'm not sure exactly how to describe the problem that I'm having with this. He lives in this house for only 5 months. I assume that by on the market, he means on the rental market, because there's no way that they bought this house and then flipped it within 5 months. That seems unlikely. But say that we're talking about renting a house. Probably the shortest term you could get would be 6 months. Now, is it possible that they left early with the consent of the landlord? Sure. Is it possible that they were renting month to month? Maybe, but in such a small rural community, it seems very unlikely that any houses would be for rent at all. And there's no reference to this house being rented. Again, because Mr. Widemouth is such a good story, I don't want to assume too much about the author. I don't want to assume that the author is young, although that's quite possible. Maybe they don't understand how renting a house works. It's just a really strange kind of logical inconsistency that's never explained in this story. Like, how do they rent this house? Why are they able to rent it for such a short period of time? It just seems, and why in such a depopulated area? It just seems like it's not really justified ever. However, there are some really good elements here where he says that there were a number of rooms that he didn't see in the 5 months that they resided there. I really like that. The narrator is establishing that this is a place of hidden secrets, even before we've gotten into anything truly supernatural. The day after my 5th birthday, attended by my parents alone, I came down with a fever. The doctor said I had mononucleosis, which meant no rough play and more fever for at least another 3 weeks. It was horrible timing to be bedridden. We were in the process of packing our things to move to Pennsylvania, and most of my things were already packed away in boxes, leaving my room barren. My mother brought me ginger ale and books several times a day, and these served the function of being my primary form of entertainment for the next few weeks. Boredom always loomed just around the corner, waiting to rear its ugly head and compound my misery. This establishes the possibility of the narrator being delirious. Maybe what he sees is just created by his illness. But for another thing, this heightens the tension by making an already vulnerable 5-year-old even more vulnerable, while making escape unlikely or impossible due to his bedridden nature. Third, it's simply incredibly relatable to experiences most of us have had as children. Almost all of us have been sick with some kind of flu at a young age, say like the flu, the West Nile virus, whatever. And memories of these events can be some of the most vivid of our early lives. Mr. Widemouth's appearance seems to come in a haze for our narrator. He does not remember a single moment where their meeting occurred. I don't exactly recall how I met Mr. Widemouth. I think it was about a week after I was diagnosed with mono. My first memory of the small creature was asking him if he had a name. He told me to call him Mr. Widemouth because his mouth was large. In fact, everything about him was large in comparison to his body. His head, his eyes, his crooked ears, but his mouth was by far the largest. This is another brilliant little passage in a story that's mostly made of brilliant passages. Not only does Mr. Widemouth seem to appear out of nowhere and at no specific time, but the creature's name is clearly only a pseudonym based on his physical appearance. What's more, it's a name that could have been invented by a child. In fact, most likely was invented by a child. But we see here that the creature proposes the name himself. This would imply, perhaps, that he was given this name by another child. It might also mean that the name is an invention of our narrator, just as the monster is, perhaps a figment of his imagination. For now, it's too early to tell. You look kind of like a Furby, I said as he flipped through one of my books. Mr. Widemouth stopped and gave me a puzzled look. Furby? What's a Furby? He asked. And you can just imagine this tiny little goblin, like opening up these books and like reading through them. I shrugged, the toy, the little robot with the big ears. You can pet and feed them, almost like a real pet. Oh, Mr. Widemouth resumed his activity. You don't need one of those. They aren't the same as having a real friend. Something that I think is so interesting here and so good is that we see Mr. Widemouth reading the boy's books. It's a small detail, but we do ask ourselves, why? Why is this creature interested in the boy's books? Well, I have a theory about why that is. And it relates to the dialogue that they're having here. It relates to the conversation about the Furby. You'll notice that Mr. Widemouth does seem intensely interested in certain things about children and about people in general. It seems like he wants to know more. I remember Mr. Widemouth disappearing every time my mother stopped by to check in on me. I lay under your bed, he later explained. I don't want your parents to see me because I'm afraid they won't let us play anymore. Of course, we know why this creepy little bastard is hiding underneath this child's bed, but it's interesting to see that Mr. Widemouth has already concocted pretty convincing reasons for his behavior. It's definitely as if he's done this before. He didn't do much during those first few days. Mr. Widemouth just looked at my books, fascinated by the stories and pictures they contained. The third or fourth morning after I met him, he greeted me with a large smile on his face. I have a new game we can play, he said. We have to wait until after your mother comes to check on you, because she can't see us play it. It's a secret game. Yeah, that's wonderful. I feel safe. After my mother delivered more books and soda at the usual time, Mr. Widemouth slipped out from under the bed and tugged my hand. We have to go to the room at the end of this hallway, he said. I objected at first, as my parents had forbidden me to leave my bed without their permission, but Mr. Widemouth persisted until I gave in. The room in question had no furniture or wallpaper. Its only distinguishing feature was a window opposite the doorway. Mr. Widemouth darted across the room and gave the window a firm push, flinging it open. He then beckoned me to look out at the ground below. Now, this part is really awesome, and I might read a little too much into the story here, but I think this is a little bit of symbolism that is overlooked by some people. Beyond the little goblin slash kobold like appearance of Mr. Widemouth, I think we're getting our first tantalizing glimpse at the fairy lore influence that runs through this story. You see, our narrator already mentioned that most of the rooms of the house are completely unknown to him at this point. They are, in essence, foreign lands. Once he enters the room, our narrator even remarks at how different it is from others in the house. Although we've never been told that the other rooms have wallpaper, he goes out of his way to inform us that this room does not. Now, there will be a little reason for this that we can go over later, but for now, I want to imagine this figuratively. One of the common traits shared by many European folk tales about fairies is their access to another realm beyond our own. In the Fenian cycle of Irish myth, this takes the form of hidden realms within the She Mounds of Ireland, and perhaps also in mystical realms such as Tir na Nog, a land of ageless abundance. In Scottish folklore, the story of Tam Lin involves a boy whisked away to the fairy realm and destined to be sacrificed in a dark ritual. Then, in the English tradition, we find stories such as Sir Orfeo, in which a kingly bard, or bardish king as the case may be, endeavors to ride to fairyland to save his wife who has been kidnapped. Even before the horror of this story has really kicked in, we're already essentially pulled into another world by means of this strange room. As stated, at the end of this room, there's a window, and that is where the really messed up stuff begins in earnest. We were on the second story of the house, but it was on a hill, and from this angle the drop was farther than 2 stories due to the incline. I like to play pretend up here, Mr. Widemouth explained. I pretend that there's a big soft trampoline below this window, and I jump. If you pretend hard enough, you bounce back up like a feather. I want you to try. I was a 5-year-old with a fever, so only a hint of skepticism darted through my thoughts as I looked down and considered the possibility. Yeah, I can do it. I'm man enough. 5 years old, I got this. It's a long drop, I said. And then Mr. Widemouth, the most unhinged dude that he is, gives the perfect retort to this child. But that's all part of the fun. It wouldn't be fun if it was only a short drop. If it were that way, you may as well just bounce on a real trampoline. Yeah, screw real trampolines. Who wants that? I want to jump out a 2-story window. All right? You're not extreme enough to ride with me and the Widemouth gang. Here we see another foreshadowing element often overlooked by commentators on this story. Mr. Widemouth may have no idea what a Furby was earlier, but he clearly knows what a trampoline is. Perhaps a little bit of recontextualization of his reading earlier is happening here. Mr. Widemouth has clearly gathered information on human beings before, to the extent that he is knowledgeable about quite a few modern inventions. And he also is rather deft at coming up with convincing arguments, at least arguments that would be convincing to a child. I toyed with the idea, picturing myself falling through thin air only to bounce back to the window on something unseen by human eyes, but the realist in me prevailed. Quite a logical child we're dealing with here. Maybe some other time, I said. I don't know if I have enough imagination. I could get hurt. Mr. Widemouth's face contorted into a snarl, but only for a moment. Anger gave way to disappointment. If you say so, he said. He spent the rest of the day under my bed, quiet as a mouse. Okay, one thing Mr. Widemouth has not developed properly is a good poker face. All right, if I was trying to... I shouldn't finish that sentence. If a demonic being is trying to trick people into, killing themselves, he needs to get a little bit better on his sales pitch, and he needs to learn to find a way to continue the dialogue. This guy is not a good salesman, all right? He would not make it at my local used car dealership. As our narrator refuses to leap through the window, citing a lack of imagination, Mr. Widemouth loses his composure for the first time. His face contorts into a snarl before giving way to disappointment. Mr. Widemouth will not lose his chance so easily, so he does return to his friendly act. The following morning, Mr. Widemouth arrived holding a small box. I want to teach you how to juggle, he said. Here are some things you can use to practice before I start giving you lessons. Again, Mr. Widemouth's just dropping the ball so much here. This guy does not know the art of the deal. I looked in the box. It was full of knives. My parents will kill me, I shouted, horrified that Mr. Widemouth had brought knives into my room, objects that my parents would never allow me to touch. I'll be spanked and grounded for a year. Mr. Widemouth frowned. It's fun to juggle with these. I want you to try it. I pushed the box away. I can't. I'll get in trouble. Knives aren't safe to just throw in the air. This kid has such logic. Good for you, 5-year-old. Knives aren't safe to just throw in the air, weird little creature. You'd think he would know this. You'd think he went to goblin school. Mr. Widemouth's frown deepened into a scowl. He took the box of knives and slid under my bed, remaining there the rest of the day. I began to wonder how often he was under me. It's just such a hilarious mental image, because at this point, you're imagining a Furby, perhaps slightly longer arms, right? And he's just stewing under the bed next to like a cardboard box filled with knives. I might be reaching a little bit here, but the desperation with which Mr. Widemouth is acting has always led me to believe that he's on some kind of deadline. Perhaps he's aware that our narrator won't be staying for long. After all, he probably can see the family packing up. In any case, his attempts to trick the narrator into harming himself become less and less subtle, and they weren't exactly subtle to start with. I started having trouble sleeping after that. Mr. Widemouth often woke me up at night, saying he put a real trampoline under the window. A big one that I couldn't see in the dark. I always declined and tried to go back to sleep. Mr. Widemouth persisted. Sometimes he stayed by my side until early in the morning, encouraging me to jump. Again, this guy just very desperate with his cells. You can't say to the kid, hey, I got a really awesome invisible trampoline. And then you start giving him a normal trampoline. Now he knows you're full of shit. Come on, he's 5 years old. He's still able to understand that. He wasn't so fun to play with anymore. My mother came to me one morning and told me I had her permission to walk around outside. She thought the fresh air would be good for me, especially after being confined in my room for so long. Ecstatic, I put on my sneakers and trotted out to the back porch, yearning for the feeling of sun on my face. Mr. Widemouth was waiting for me, presumably with his arms crossed and smoking a cigarette. I have something I want you to see, he said. I must have given him a weird look, because he then said, It's safe, I promise. Mr. Widemouth, when have you ever been talking about safety before? Man's completely lost the plot. Suddenly he's interested in safety. Nonetheless, we do see Mr. Widemouth here changing his tact, trying to entice the child a little bit more. I followed him to the beginning of a deer trail, which ran through the woods behind the house. This is an important path, he explained. I've had a lot of friends about your age. When they were ready, I took them down this path to a special place. You aren't ready yet, but one day I hope to take you there. I returned to the house, wondering what kind of place lay beyond that trail. Once again, here we can see the real fairy tale DNA. At least I think so. Mr. Widemouth is promising to take our narrator down a path through a liminal space, backrooms, through a liminal space that will ultimately bring him to another world. Now, this story will end up ending on quite a different note, but I do want to linger on this idea a little bit. In traditional fairy tales, the fairies often abscond with the child to their realm. From there, they may decide to raise the child as their own. They may keep the child as a slave or even as a beloved guest. They may also turn to something darker. To return to our folk ballad, Tam Lin, we have the eponymous knight's words, which I'm going to use here to again represent the fairy story more generally. It goes something like this. Roxbrugh he was my grandfather, took me with him to bide, and aince it fell upon a day that waded me betide, and aince it fell upon a day, a cold day and a snell, when we were frae the hunting come, that frae my horse I fell. The queen of fairies she caught me, in yon green hill do dwell, and pleasant is the fairy land, but an eerie tale to tell. I at the end of 7 days, we pay a teens to hell, I am sae fair and full of flesh, I'm feared it be me sell. Now, of course, that's a little bit Scots, and I didn't do a particularly good job of reading it. But essentially, what it means is, at one point, Tamlin fell from his horse. He was picked up by the Queen of Fairies and brought into fairy land. And again, he does mention the Queen of Fairies in yon green hill do dwell, which means, again, a kind of relation to the Irish fairy myths about them living in mounds. Anyways, not important. I'm just going off on this. But what's most important here is that teened to hell, again, a tax paid to hell by the fairies. Yeah, it's metal as hell. Fairies, at once majestic and beautiful, are also often forces of evil in folklore, especially because they come from a non-Christian primordial time. They may well be godless monsters, offering up children and other humans alike as blood sacrifice to the devil himself. The child stealing Rumpelstiltskin of German myth paints a similarly grim picture of otherworldly beings stealing away children for their own devilish designs. Once again, I want to say the deer path here is not literally a pathway to the fairy world, but it evokes this kind of idea of a passage to another world. 2 weeks after I met Mr. Widemouth, the last load of our things had been packed into a moving truck. I would be in the cab of that truck, sitting next to my father for the long drive to Pennsylvania. I considered telling Mr. Widemouth that I would be leaving, but even at 5 years old, I was beginning to suspect that perhaps the creature's intentions were not to my benefit, despite what he said otherwise. For this reason, I decided to keep my departure a secret. He's actually been doing a great job. He's been very wary of this weird little Furby creature that I'm pretty sure most kids would be excited to see, but also wouldn't be able to keep a secret for very long. My father and I were in the truck at 4 a.m. He was hoping to make it to Pennsylvania by lunchtime tomorrow, with the help of an endless supply of coffee and a six-pack of energy drinks. He seemed more like a man who was about to run a marathon rather than one who was about to spend 2 days sitting still. "Early enough for you?" he asked. I nodded and placed my head against the window, hoping for some sleep before the sun came up. I felt my father's hand on my shoulder. "This is the last move, son, I promise. I know it's hard for you, as sick as you've been. Once Daddy gets promoted, we can settle down and you can make friends." This is a very conscientious father, actually. The first time we've heard the father, the first time we've seen an adult in this story, actually, which is significant. I think it is significant that here we see, although the parents have technically existed throughout the story, now they are entering in as a protective force. The father is, at least here, as fathers are often seen as this protective figure. We're getting this feeling that the terror is over. And the absence of the parents throughout the story, the absence of their real presence as characters, is quite notable. Again, as another thing that amps up the horror. I opened my eyes as we backed out of the driveway. I saw Mr. Widemouth's silhouette in my bedroom window. He stood motionless until the truck was about to turn onto the main road. He gave a pitiful little wave goodbye, steak knife in hand. I didn't wave back. Years later, I returned to New Vineyard. The piece of land our house stood upon was empty except for the foundation, as the house burned down a few years after my family left. Out of curiosity, I followed the deer trail that Mr. Widemouth had shown me. Part of me expected him to jump out from behind a tree and scare the living bejesus out of me, but I felt that Mr. Widemouth was gone, somehow tied to the house that no longer existed. The trail ended at the New Vineyard Memorial Cemetery. I noticed that many of the tombstones belonged to children. And that is one of the most perfect wham lines in the history of creepypasta. As I mentioned, our author, Perfect Circle 35, actually pretty deftly hinted that this was coming, pretty ingeniously hinted that Mr. Widemouth had some familiarity with other children before, and that this might have been the result. So ends this story with one of the most iconic wham lines in all of horror fiction, I will say. The story is a legend. The idea that Mr. Widemouth was somehow tied to the house and now gone is interesting and gives off something of a ghost story vibe. Perhaps he's an evil manifestation of a previous tenant. Or maybe he's some kind of twisted domestic spirit like a pixie or a brownie. Thankfully, the author does not give us any more than the barest speculation, adhering both to realism and a good instinct for preserving the mystery. So in the end, what has Perfect Circle 35 given us? This story is a nearly perfect modern twist on the fairy tale, in my opinion. A story that ends not with a child being euphemistically carried off to live in the court of an elven lord or a fairy queen, but rather with the horrifying reality of child mortality. The symbolism is rife, and Mr. Widemouth might be interpreted in a number of ways. Of course, he could be representative of stranger danger, the idea that children may never truly be safe from insidious outside forces. Ironically enough, this reading may gain more traction in the future as children access the internet at earlier and earlier ages. Perhaps Mr. Widemouth might be reinterpreted as an allegory for videos that promote harmful and violent acts to young children. That's certainly a problem that we're seeing online right now. Or maybe he's an allegory for the household dangers which plague the minds of so many new parents. Sharp knives in accessible places, open windows, electrical sockets, pill bottles, etc. It is a very valid reading, in my view, that Mr. Widemouth, in his seemingly friendly and harmless appearance, may indeed represent these factors that all too often lead to premature deaths. For me, however, this story is most effectively viewed as a fairy tale of sorts. It is the incursion of a terrifying, unknown force of evil into our lives, the force of nature, if you will. This creature, for reasons entirely unknown to us, wants to take the lives of children, but it seems that it must follow strict rules. It seems that the children must die by accident, although there's a possibility that this is only done by Mr. Widemouth due to his physical weakness. It may be that he intended to kill the narrator himself if things continued to not go his way. Do the souls of the dead victims follow him to some mysterious other realm? My guess would be no, but it could be left open to the imagination. As quickly as he appears, he disappears, never to be seen again. Like the fairies of old, Mr. Widemouth represents destructive forces, both those of nature and those of man, as he is personified, like a man. Just as our ancestors imagined the malice of spirits behind every misfortune, I think this story recasts the tragedy of dying young, not as an act of fate, not as an accident, but of a malicious and downright sadistic world, a world that's out to get you. This is a vision of the world that speaks not to what it is, but the emotional truth that many of us feel. Maybe the world really is out to get us, and we're lucky that we're just quick enough to outrun it.